Joe Budden calls out Flip for being disrespectful and acting selfish on the Joe Budden podcast. That's right, on the last episode of the Patreon called Soggy Marbles, Joe took issue with how Flip was making the podcast unprofessional, and he didn't like how members of Improper Improv were disrespecting other members of the channel, of the Joe Budden Network, and so on and so forth. Towards the back end of this episode, Joe calls out Flip for his confrontation with Marc, who had an issue with Shammy dissing people on the Joe Budden Network.
But I don't give a f*** though. I don't give a fuck. They don't call me about it. Yeah, but now I won't call you in the future, and it's done. Because you was talking to be cool. Then you wouldn't have called me. I didn't think you called me.
Remember, Marc took issue with how Flip had somebody on his show, Improper Improv, dissing members of the Joe Budden Network.
When I watch the podcast every now and then, because I'm a fan of him, he doesn't look like he looked on CNN. He's ashy. I seen Joe give him lotion one time.
And he even took a greater offense to how Flip promoted it on his Twitter. Basically, he was hinting that Flip is asking Shammy to do this type of stuff if he's promoting it on his social media. Emanny then says next time Shammy says something about members of the cast, he is going to approach him in a more confrontational way. And Joe points out that Shammy saying things is wild because he's at a stage in his health where he can't even be approached or physically confronted, and believes Shammy is more engaging than having to resort to disrespecting members of the cast. After that, Flip reveals that he texted Shammy and told him he's no longer allowed to diss members of the Joe Budden podcast, and Joe asserts that Shammy dissing members of the show with Erickson, Parks, and staff of the JBP is super disrespectful, and then Joe says he would never let it fly, but it's live, so what can he do? Now, I think Joe Budden is being manipulative here, because what did he think Flip was going to do if he let Shammy on the show? This is Shammy's style, this is his bag, and it's actually entertaining. Then Flip rebuttals and says, hey, did anyone express this to Ian Schwartzman, manager of Joe Budden? And Emanny says he doesn't want to go that route and wants to speak directly to Flip if he has an issue. With Joe saying Ian is COE and he's from the Howard Stern era where everything is for content, so that doesn't really count. You can't really reach out to Ian in that regard. So now everybody, if you watch Improper Improv, it looks like Shammy won't be allowed to diss members of the podcast, which is going to be interesting because that was the highlight of the first two episodes. Joe then says this conversation was supposed to be about Marc versus Flip's crash out, and Joe says he likes how Marc handled the crash out because it didn't disrupt the rest of the show, and that obviously was a shot at Flip, who has had crash outs before that impacted the rest of the podcast. Remember when he threatened to fight Joe?
He said, if you want to fight, whatever you want to do, we could do it right now. And I said, so what's up then, nigga? We were separated far from each other, but it was talking. So, you know, what happens is like Joe's voice is powerful, and, you know, certain things, you know, I was going to the story about on the balcony when we had our meeting, because we had our meeting Monday, I went back Tuesday. I was supposed to come back in July. We had our meeting and we were just arguing, man. Like, I'm talking about the neighbors was looking outside. Like, they were looking outside, record, like the neighbors, like we were loud, using the F word, and I'm like,
yeah, I remember y'all talking about that briefly. Yeah.
Like, I like trying to play with my family, but you got to throw like that in there to see how neighbors care. Like, 10 minutes passed. He said, yo, when the last time you got into a fight? I said, right now.
When he threatened to fight Ish, that other time where he was like, didn't pick a sleeper. I think Lola Brooke was on the show and he was acting weird. So basically, Flip is a diva that doesn't allow the show to be calm. Yes, he engineers moments, but it comes at the expense of the wellness of the cast. Then Flip says he doesn't like this situation because it makes him look like he is the problem when Melyssa Ford, Ice, Emanny, and all of them agree that he is the problem. He's essentially saying that members of the cast are orchestrating a smear campaign against him and calls out Melyssa Ford for hyping up the situation with Marc Lamont Hill. Apparently, after they argued, she went over to Marc and asked if everything was okay. I think what Flip is hinting at is that Ford made more of a show than it needed to be. And the way I kind of see what Flip might be saying, you know, like when something settles down, someone going over and be like, are you okay? Is everything fine? I don't know, things got a little testy back there. I'm pretty sure that's what Melyssa Ford says. And let's be honest, Melyssa Ford, she's kind of victim-y, manipulative. She wants Flip to look more and more like the aggressor in these situations. So I can see why Flip is a bit wary of her movements. Then Emanny urges Flip to take accountability for his actions instead of blaming everyone for a smear campaign. And Ice follows up by saying that Flip's reaction made the Marc situation worse. And Joe says that's how it always goes with Flip. Every time Flip feels disrespected, he feels like he has to take it to another level as opposed to listening to what was being said. Joe then says Flip has challenged everyone to a fight on the show, saying that he's offered to square up with Emanny, Ish, and Melyssa Ford. But we also have to add people outside of the Joe Budden show. We're talking about people like Dubs. He has his own channel. He's part of the WeWork section of the Twitter Spaces, which I'm also a part of.
You talking about? Sounds silly. We gonna fix you. I promise you gonna be on camera tonight. Suck my. Tell me all that when you see me today. You talking about? I'm on that, nigga. Yes.
And me.
The blogs from an emotional perspective and standpoint, and he will get slapped in his mouth. The only reason I didn't go to his house or his job is because I promised Ian and them. And then when I was beefing with them over there, I didn't do it because he wasn't speaking about me negatively. And if your agenda is, yo, if you hit me, I'm going to sue you, fine, I'm down with it. I'm not going to kill you and clap you. Anytime a story talk about me attacking him, they tell you how I'm coming. Yo, punch me in the face. Yo, he tried to attack me. Yo, they telling you. So you're preparing yourself. You should prepare yourself. And if that's your bad, I respect that. I respect. I'm gonna say what I want. Touch me, I'm taking this to court. Didn't do it.
It's funny for Joe to talk out of two sides of his necks, right? He's saying that Flip is weird. He's always trying to fight members of the cast. But I remember when Flip wanted to fight me and Dubs, Joe was in the audience on stage like, oh, we want to see this happen. It's going to be great.
Lot of emotion up here. What do you two have to say to each other?
You a messy Joe.
He's promoting Flip. He likes when Flip does this, but then when it gets out of line, he wants to put the toothpaste back in the tube. He's not good at leading. He's not good at that. He's just good at playing the situation out, and then when it gets too bad, he does damage control. He's not a good forecaster of the things that are about to happen. It's not his bag. He's not the best leader. That's why Ian does that type of work. After that, Flip says the only one he really tried to fight is Ish, and that Emanny wanted to fight him, not the other way around. So Flip is essentially trying to clear up some of the narratives that he feels uncomfortable with. But I mean, hey, Flip, his default is to try to fight everybody. Joe then says that the way Flip acts makes the culture of the JBP look bad, and Flip says that members of the show are running a smear campaign against him again, and everyone mocks him for that belief. Flip then makes a couple of good points, saying that because he is often the aggressor, you can accuse him of anything and it will look valid. After that, Flip says that Emanny was wrong for trying to fight him because Joe was making the same jokes about Melyssa Ford, and Emanny didn't approach him. But Emanny says that he approached Flip because he asked Flip to stop, and then Emanny accuses Flip of pushing people's boundaries. Then Flip follows up by saying he wants to create content, he wants to be free to do his own thing, and Emanny says it can't be at the expense of other people. And Flip follows up saying that because other people play it safe, it doesn't mean he has to. Now, this is interesting because he's basically saying that, you know, just because Ish, Ice, Emanny, and other members of the show like Parks try to play it safe to the vest, you know, they don't say much, doesn't mean that he has to do that. And he's totally right. The way he makes content is the way he makes content. Because if Flip wasn't the way he was, this podcast would be so boring, y'all. Y'all saw that episode without Flip and Joe. It was super trash, and it shows that some people are unwilling to lead and are more thoughtful of their public persona than what makes a good entertaining product. Flip then says it looks like the cast thinks he's a nuisance, and he's totally right in that assertion. Everybody, it looks like they don't like him on the show, and they're only putting up with him just because, it's a podcast and it's Joe's show, not theirs. Joe then says that Flip doesn't have to be a nuisance and he is dynamic, so he puts up with it and says he has had multiple conversations with Flip in regards to the way he conducts himself on the pod. Joe then says he had an issue with a tweet Flip posted that I believe Joe made him delete. I think it was something along the lines of, I'm a heel, I challenge everyone to a fight, I should be suspended. I think basically why Joe asked him to delete it is because it makes him look like a clown. It makes him look like he has somebody on his show that does whatever they want. And if you remember, one of the calling cards of Joe's podcast that he used to like to throw in Rory and Mal's face was the podcast is super mature without Rory and Mal. But now with the presence of Flip, it's more immature than it's ever been. Joe then accuses Flip of being selfish with the way he creates content on the JBP, and Flip says he's trying to raise the value of the JBP. Joe then says he's not interested in the value of what Flip is trying to do and says the added engagement it brings isn't worth the hassle. He also says it doesn't make him any money and that it doesn't bring the show any Patreon subscribers. Now, Joe is always dismissing his YouTube, which is odd because it obviously makes a lot of money and Flip's antics does lead to more views. So I think Joe is capping and trying to lower and demean Flip's value because it's just a fact. If you have more YouTube viewers, you're going to get more Patreon viewers. And what did you think Flip was going to do? This is Flip's bag. When you hired him, what you thought he was going to do? Long soliloquies about the prison industrial complex? No, he was going to get loud. He was going to get angry. He was going to engineer storylines. That's his bag. You provided him no guidance. You asked him to come and run the ship for you when you weren't there and be the one to guide the show from the boring era of Ish and Ice. And now that he's doing it, you want to play moral police? Nah, man, you brought him in there to soup up the content, and now you got to deal with the consequences, especially because you let him run amok, and when you suspended him with pay, so you really let him sidestep the consequences. So Joe's essentially a pushover, but he's only a pushover because Flip has made the content better, and now that Joe notices the content isn't getting any better, and in fact, it might be getting stale, he's trying to put his foot down, but it's falling on deaf ears. Joe then says he believes Flip is capable of things beyond what he does on the pod, and he makes Flip cry. That's insane, y'all. Yeah, Flip cried. I think Joe hit him with the, you're just so much more than what you show publicly, and I guess that made Flip feel emotional. But really, Flip, you need to be a little bit more professional because you're getting manipulated very easily, and it's kind of sad. Then it's revealed that Ford once called someone to approach Flip for disrespecting her. Now that's interesting, and Flip did mention in the past that someone talked to him, so I think that someone did so on behalf of Melyssa Ford. There was a while where Melyssa Ford was tweeting like, I could get you touched. Yeah, she actually said some nonsense like that, and I think that was in regards to Flip. Yeah, Melyssa Ford, the mob gangster, was hinting that she could have Flip touched up. Yeah, man, when they tell you the Joe Budden podcast co-hosts get along, they are lying. Flip then says he hates that Joe is doing spaces with people who kick his back in, and Ice agrees. For those of you that don't know, there's a community on Spaces called the JB TV community, and a lot of the time they are often kicking members of the cast. They're kicking their back in. They're basically doing what I do, but I would say even worse because they don't really have facts. It's just a bunch of hate. And they're saying that Joe is legitimizing them by staying on their stage and engaging with them, and that it probably makes them do it even more because they feel as if Joe likes that type of stuff.
Flip, we don't give a this much. Please. Like, you are funny. I like what you bring. I like the joke. I like when he just bursts out and starts singing. But I don't give a fuck whether you leave. If you want to, we don't want to hear you continuously talk about leaving and just, I'm so tired of this shit, bro.
I said that same thing. That whole wanting to be fired routine is
like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Please.
I blame Joe for
It's
allowing
extremely immature.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the convo hits a standstill when Flip gets in there.
Yeah, but the thing is, I love Flip. I love
his energy.
But that's just the part. It's just like, yo, I don't give a fuck.
And Joe does. In the past, Joe has said he likes that the fan base is so ravenous that they're willing to trash members of the show and say, oh, this person shouldn't be on the pod. They shouldn't be on the pod. He likes that. And I think what it is the members of the cast, they are insecure about that. So instead of addressing Joe, they address me, they address JBP Elevated, aka Man in the Car, and they address JBTV as opposed to taking it on with Joe because he's the boss that signed their checks and they really don't want to take him on because they can't argue with him because Joe controls the show. After that, Joe calls out Flip for his constant tweets about threatening to fight members of the show and how it reflects poorly on him, and this may be the reason Joe told him to take down the tweet. After that, Joe calls out Flip for doing a Patreon episode where he promoted how he made Melyssa Ford cry. This was on Flip's Patreon, and he did actually do that. And I believe that's the reason Flip blocked me on Patreon, because I was the first one to report what he actually said. On the pod, he lied. He straight up lied to everybody. He told them, I didn't really talk about Melyssa Ford's situation, but then I was like, oh, you can't tell me that. So I went to Flip's Patreon and watched the episode, and he did actually talk about Melyssa Ford and how he made her cry and what exactly he said that made her lose it. So what he did was he engineered drama on the Joe Budden podcast and then siphoned that audience to his Patreon. So it was a bit selfish. That's exactly what Joe's talking about. Joe then reveals he's on Spaces, but that shouldn't affect anyone because Spaces doesn't have the ability to get anyone demoted. I don't know about that. If someone's on the Spaces getting their back kicked in, it certainly can affect them. Joe then reveals that when he said Flip would be on the show a lot less, it was because Flip requested more time off so he can do other things, and that he wants Flip to work better with everyone, and says Flip's next contract will be that he can do whatever he wants. Oh man, I know it was a lot, y'all. I know it was a lot. That's actually a lot. That's actually what happened on the show. Now, I gave an extensive breakdown because this is a big episode for the podcast. This is very big. A lot was revealed. Joe told Flip Shammy can no longer be on Improper Improv disrespecting members of the show. It was revealed that Melyssa Ford had Flip pressed for disrespecting her. And Joe laid out that, next time I do a contract with you, it's going to be one that allows you to do whatever you want. And that's really just for Flip to dig a grave so he can fire Flip eventually. But let me know what you think. Did you watch this episode? I hope you did, so that way you're not in the comments section just acting like you didn't see him. Like, Danny, you're gassing it. Nah, man, Flip cried. He bugged out. He sounded sad. And he was like, y'all making me look like a nuisance. And it also was apparent to me that members of the show are tired of Flip. They don't like working with Flip. They think Flip is annoying. They're simply pretending to be cool with him because Joe's cool with him. He's that person at the job you pretend like you're cool with just so it doesn't get awkward. I'm sorry, that's what it is. I don't know if Flip cares. I don't know if it bothers him that people on the show dislike him. I think there's some people that like him, but you know that person you might like, but they make your job harder, so you hate them. Then conversely, you know that person at your job that you don't like them, but they make your job easy, so you rock with them. Like, oh, that's Chad, man. He don't like me, I don't like him, but we show each other respect. He goes home, he does his, job, but he doesn't try to be my friend, and I understand that. Flip is the type of guy that he's cool with you. He's able to talk basketball. He's able to talk about everything, but then he doesn't do his job well, so you secretly resent him. That's what Flip is. It's not likable. Very confrontational. And when he doesn't get his way, he cries. He cries. By cry, I mean he wants to fight you. He wants to disrespect you. He wants to bring narratives. And that's why members of the show are tired of him. But Joe is saving him. And I think the reason he's saving him is because of the Rory and Mal situation. Rory and Mal made Joe look crazy. And now Joe can't really fire somebody chaotically. So what he wants Flip to do is continue to step over boundaries. So that way when he does fire him or ask him to leave, he doesn't look crazy. I mean, Flip challenged Joe to a fight. They almost fought. He challenged Ish to a fight. He made Melyssa Ford cry. And he's essentially telling Shammy, diss members of the show. He may not be giving the call directly, but he ain't really stop him, and he promoted it on his Twitter, which set Marc Lamont Hill off. All right, y'all, this is a really long video. I didn't think I was going to go this long, but it was a big deal. And the reason it's so long is because it needs to be this long, as it was a very significant episode of the Patreon. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. Oh, man, as the world turns of the Joe Budden podcast. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.